Shades of the past. Rory was interrogating the brine man when the sky turned shimmering cobalt. The changing light flickered through the old window, warped with age, distracting him from the task. Rory stood in the 1900s-era factory at the back of the Umbra Vellum hall. The place smelled like sawdust and faint chemicals. Thick timbers held up the building, which had survived the modernization of the city. The Enochian district, which they were on the edge of, resisted the passage of time better than most. "You can't call me here through the veil, ask about the factory and then ignore me," said the brine man. "I'm sorry," said Rory, edging towards the window to get a better look at whatever was happening outside. Tires squealed up the block, followed by angry shouting. The brine man glowered. His waterlogged clothing hung damply on his thin frame. Water dripped onto the floor, never pooling, but none of that was interesting to Rory, who saw his neighbors staring at the sky with the same mix of apprehension and wonder that he felt. "I hate this place. Even more than when the Hydra rum ran like a silver river," said the brine man as water dripped from his soggy hair, making him even more depressing than he sounded. He swiped his hand across the table, rattling the water bottle Rory had left there, but not knocking it over as intended. The brine man wasn't strong enough to affect the mortal world like some apparitions. Forgetting the strange sky for a moment, Rory turned, which wasn't easy because of the boot on his left foot, which he'd fractured last week taking samples at the site of the Brownwater massacre. "Hydra rum. Silver River. What's that mean?" he asked the brine man. The waterlogged man opened his mouth and salt water ran out as he grinned. This was the normal way of things. The brine man had resisted all of Rory's attempts to learn the truth of that time. "Fine. You don't want to talk now. I need to check on this, I'll be right back," said Rory, fearing that his tinkering with the Veilstone had caused a breach between the worlds of the living and the dead. Patron Sebastian Hollow had assured them that the artifact was safe, but it wouldn't be the first time his cursed luck had overwhelmed even the stablest piece of equipment. The boot on his foot was proof of that. "I ain't waitin' for you fucking bogtrotter," said the brine man. Rory kept the amusement from his lips until he'd left the building, not wanting the brine man to know his insult lacked the bite it once had, being 100 years out of date. He imagined his Irish ancestors, fresh off the boat, might have found offense. The cramped yard between the factory and the house didn't give him a good look at the sky, so he went all the way to the street, where he found he wasn't the only one staring. A thick blue light had covered the city. Almost dome-like. "It's trapped us here," said Judith, the old woman who lived in the brownstone next door. She was standing outside in a patterned housecoat, an unlit cigarette hanging from her lips. "I was watering the flowers when it started. Right out of the spire, like someone spilled blue milk across the sky." A pit opened in his stomach. He didn't know why he feared the dome, but it made him shudder. Through the gap of Judith's open door, Rory spied the pale face of Walter. The old woman followed his gaze back to the door, at the moment Walter disappeared. "Walt?" she asked. Rory nodded. "I'll keep him from mischief, I always do." There were a handful of bent nails outside the back door a few days ago. "I'm so sorry." "It can't be helped," said Rory with a shrug. Judith jutted her chin towards the sky. "What does your patron make of it?" Rory sighed. "They're on a field trip to New York, investigating a banshee sighting. It's just me." Her eyes flitted to the boot on his left foot. "Bad luck then." He didn't bother answering. Acknowledging the curse that seemed to follow him through his life only gave it more power, he'd long ago decided. Still, it was hard for it not to linger at the edge of his consciousness. "You think this isn't a good thing?" he asked. "You do?" "No. Don't know what it is." The entire street was filled with neighbors craning their necks at the object in the sky that everyone was calling a dome. What was its purpose? Why had it formed now? A few went inside but returned immediately with a drink or a phone, checking for news about the dome. Rory thumbed open his device, pulling up the news feeds, which were slow due to the heavy traffic. He imagined the whole world was suddenly tuning into whatever was happening in the city of sorcery. Most of the stories were focused on the dome, but he found one deeper on the list related to huge spiny creatures that had appeared near the statue of Invictus and were killing people on the streets. The report sent a chill down his spine. He wasn't much for conspiracies, but one couldn't be a student in the 100 Halls and not hear the rumors about infernal invasions since the head patron had returned. One of the girls from his indoor soccer team was a member of alchemists and in one of the secret societies. She told him in confidence that it wasn't really Invictus that had returned, but an imposter who was preparing the city for invasion. Rory was studying the spire for clues when he saw winged creatures cut across the sky over the third ward. At least 4 of them. His heart sped up. "I don't think we should be standing out here," said Rory. Judith pursed her lips. "You'll protect us, right? Isn't that what being a mage of the 100 Halls means? Maybe if you lived next to Coterie or Arcanium, but talking to ghosts is about all Umbra Vellum is good for. My Merlin scores were barely high enough to qualify for the halls. I'm afraid even my 5 elements are rather lackluster." A flat stare was all the acknowledgement Judith gave his admission, then an explosion from further towards the spire had everyone ducking. Smoke rose from a distant neighborhood followed by sirens. "Do you hear that?" asked Judith. When he focused, Rory heard gunshots. He thought he heard screams but hoped that was his imagination. "I always wondered what I'd do if I was stuck at the end of the world, and I guess I've learned the answer is stand on the sidewalk and wait to die," mused Rory. "I'm sure you've got something up your sleeve, Mr. Mage," said Judith as she went back inside. Her enthusiasm was heartwarming, but he knew deep down inside that his time in the halls had been something of a mess. He'd been so excited about passing the trials of magic, only to find himself in a hall so tiny and new that it only had a few other students, and their scholarship was less magical and more a group of historians using the Veilstone to question ghosts about the past. He'd been questioning the Brine Man, a poor soul who'd been working in the factory in the early 1900s, when he'd gotten stuffed into a barrel of salt water to drown when he'd run afoul of some local criminals. Rory's goal was to find out about the gangs that had existed in that time, which would help them understand the history of the Enochian district better, and why it had lost citizens to the other wards of the city. At one time it had been the thriving heart, but then a series of explosions amid gang wars had made it an unsafe place to live. The growing chaos in the city, speeding cars, more gunfire and all too real screams sent his neighbors back into their houses. Rory watched a guy in a flannel shirt and trucking hat hammer boards across his front door. A shotgun leaned against the concrete stairs as he worked. Another family piled into their sedan with luggage packed on their laps and sped away. As Rory watched, he wondered what he should be doing until he spotted Walter near the side of his house. "Go back home. I don't have time for trouble." Walter stuck his tongue out as he glared at him from the edge of his property. "Bury it," said the kid. Rory wasn't sure if it was supposed to be an insult or something else. "It's not safe out here," said Rory, realizing he was saying it mostly to himself as Walter disappeared behind the corner. As if the world wanted to prove its point, a car heading the opposite way screeched to a sliding stop. It was near the end of the street. Rory could hardly believe what had caused the evasive maneuver. A hulking creature bigger than a gorilla, with mottled green skin and the head of a toothy toad, was blocking the car. Rory had been to the Portland Zoo years ago and knew this wasn't any kind of creature that made its home in their world, or even one of the nearby realms, which meant that the rumors were likely true. It was a demon from the infernal realm. Rory watched in horror as the frog-mouthed creature punched its fist through the windshield and dragged a screaming woman out. It leaned its head back and dropped the woman into its mouth. The sickening crunch and cut-short scream left Rory shaken as he backed towards his door. As he slipped inside, the frog demon finished devouring the woman. He'd been sure he'd moved inside fast enough, but the frog demon looked his direction, sending water into his knees. His mind went all directions at once. Flee. Fight. Curl into a ball and wait to die. He'd heard of panic attacks but had never had one. It was a bad time for his first. Rory punched the hardwood frame, the jolt of pain sending adrenaline through his system. He could move again, but so too was the frog demon, loping his way on two enormous dark green legs. He closed the door, locked it, and stood back. Movement past the window to his right, followed by throaty growling outside his door. The wooden barrier exploded into the front room. Rory felt splinters the size of silverware fly past his face, stunned that nothing hit him. The frog demon stuck its head through the gap, but its shoulders were too wide to fit through the narrow door. It strained to reach him, baring its teeth, which had flecks of blood and half-chewed flesh stuck between them. Rory tried firing a bit of flame at the infernal creature, fumbling the gestures due to fear and haste. He tried a second time but forgot to add phase. Finally, the third attempt shot a ball of flame at the frog demon's head. It collapsed over its thick skin without change. The frog demon paused, scrunching up its nose, making an audible sniff. The round eyes widened even further as a hiss came out of its throat. The creature pulled its head from the door and circled around to the wrought iron fence between the Hall property and Judith's brownstone. The sound of metal being torn asunder filled the air. The fence, partially visible through the side window, tilted to the side and then snapped at the base, crashing the metal into the brick side wall. As the demon marched over the fallen fence, Rory ran towards the back of the house, trying to keep an eye on its progress. The back door to the hall was built the same as the front. For once he appreciated the strong bones of the old brick building, which was abnormally hot in the summer and cold in the winter due to the gaps in the window frames. But the frog demon didn't try to get in through the back door as he'd thought it would. It rumbled over to the wooden factory building and leaned its shoulder through the wide garage door that they'd installed on the front. The flimsy material bent inward, then snapped, allowing the frog demon inside. He could no longer see it. Rory tried the other back windows, but the creature had moved to a place it was no longer visible. As he heard heavy thuds echo from inside, his curiosity overcame his sense, and he crept out the back door, ready to flee inside the moment the creature revealed its ugly head. The frog demon, to his utter surprise, was punching and clawing at the ground like a dog trying to dig up an old bone. The dirt floor of the factory was hard from age, but the powerful strikes were cracking and tilting up sections of earth. A fist broke through, revealing a space beneath the factory. Rory hadn't known there was a basement. Nor had the patron. It was a surprise that would have been more welcome in different times, but now he was curious as to why the demon wanted into that place. "What kind of fusterlugs are you? Why, you're uglier than a mud fence," said the brine man as he strolled up to the frog demon mid-floor punch. With its fist in the hole, readying to pull up and expose more of the space beneath the factory, the creature growled at the brine man. The frog demon lunged forward, swiping through the apparition, expecting to come away with a torn arm. With nothing to show for its trouble, the creature stared at its empty fist and bared its teeth in a display of dominance. The brine man slapped the frog demon on its broad nose, which would have been funnier if the whole city hadn't gone to hell. Literally. The creature swiped through the empty form of the soggy man, before cautiously returning to its digging. Rory searched his memory for any kind of demon-warding spell that he might have picked up when studying for the Merlin trials, but it had been years ago. "You're a useless mage," he whispered to himself. The frog demon broke through the floor, exposing a hole big enough for a man to slip down. It knelt in the dirt, reaching through the gap. Rory wished he could see what it was after. A rock came flying from his left, hitting the frog demon in the side of the head. Rory turned to see Walt in mid-throw, a second projectile flying through the air, hitting the creature in the eye. The frog demon squeezed its eye shut as it turned its head, spotting both Rory and the young boy. "What are you doing?" Walt grinned with fervor and then ran across the fallen fence back to Judith's place, as the frog demon came roaring out of the factory. Rory barely threw himself into the house in time. The frog demon took one look at the narrow door, then across the way to the glass double doors that Judith had installed a few years ago. It loped in that direction. "Oh no!" The frog demon crashed through the glass doors. A shotgun blast from inside startled Rory. Through the side window he saw Judith backing up her stairs with the weapon in her arms, trying to reload. Rory followed the frog demon across the downed fence line, before he remembered he had no way of stopping the infernal creature. He looked back to the factory, deciding that whatever was beneath the floor might be an answer. As the frog demon smashed its way up the narrow staircase in Judith's house, Rory entered the old factory and threw himself on his knees next to the hole. He couldn't see in the darkness, so he brought a mage light into existence. The pale glow illuminated round shapes beneath, which his brain eventually interpreted as the tops of barrels. There was at least a half-dozen large barrels and many more smaller ones scattered about the basement. Rory couldn't see any markings from his position. "Hydra rum," Brine Man said ominously. "Hydra rum." The Brine Man grinned at Rory. After checking to make sure the frog demon was still in Judith's house, he dropped into the basement. Rory coaxed the mage light closer to read the faint print on the side of the barrels. The largest one near him read, "Hydra gyrum." "Hydra rum," said Rory. He pulled up a definition on his phone to find it was the old word for mercury. Now he understood what the demon was after. He didn't know much about them, but he knew they liked mercury. It was a superfood or something. But why was there mercury in the basement of the old factory? "What were you doing?" he asked the Brine Man. The waterlogged apparition said nothing as he stared at Rory. "Fine." Rory checked the other barrels to find other chemicals and alchemical reagents. They'd been mixing elixirs and possible explosives. He started to understand what the Brine Man had been involved with before he was killed. "You were mixing things here. That's why they killed you?" he asked. "Hydra rum," said Brine Man in anguish, an ache behind his eyes that suggested something darker. "Silver River bad." "Yeah, no shit, mercury is toxic, but that doesn't explain why someone stuffed you in a barrel." The Brine Man stared at Judith's house. The sounds of 2x4s snapping as the frog demon worked its way up the stairs to reach the old woman told Rory he had to find a solution soon, or she'd be eaten by the creature. "Damn that Walt," said Rory. "Walter," said the Brine Man frowning. There was a familiarity in the way he said it that tugged on Rory's thoughts. "How do you make the explosives?" The Brine Man stared in the basement. "Come on. You want to help? Maybe there's something here, the reason why you linger in our world. Help me save Judith." "Save Walt?" Yes, we'll save him too." "Save Walt," said the Brine Man, nodding his head. "Walt didn't see anything. He didn't mean to." "Focus. How do I make the explosives? Or can I even with this old crap?" The Brine Man's gaze bounced between the barrels. He extended his arm towards a dark corner of the basement. "There." When the Brine Man didn't move, Rory followed the line of his arm, coaxing the mage light behind him. If he didn't hurry, the frog demon would finish off Judith and then return to the mercury to find another meal waiting. "I really should go back in the house," he told himself as he searched the dark corner. There wasn't anything but dust and cobwebs. "There's nothing here." He turned back, but the Brine Man's arm hadn't moved. Rory checked again, wondering if either the ghost's memory was faulty or he was missing something obvious. Rory let the mage light drift higher. A door higher on the wall was revealed. Faint lines of warding were traced across the rim of the thick wood panel. "Is it safe to open?" he asked the Brine Man. "Save Walt?" "A little too late for that." "Oh broken hells, I hope I don't blow myself up." Rory shoved his fingers behind the edge of the panel. The door wouldn't budge at first. The earth had shifted around the compartment, sealing it in, but he was able to dig it away with his fingers until he could free it. To his supreme relief, the door opened without triggering a protective ward. The runes weren't a trap. As he peered into the darkness, the dim mage light illuminating its contents, he saw the purpose to the runes. They'd preserved the contents. He saw a collection of small jars with white powder inside. He pulled a jar out before he wondered if he should be touching it with his bare hands. There didn't seem to be any burns on his flesh, so he grabbed 2 more jars. Using the barrel of Hydra rum, he climbed out of the basement while the brine man stared at him with a pained expression. Save Walt from Silver River. I won't make boom jars anymore. No more. The truth of what had happened became clearer than it had been before. I'm sorry, said Rory. He left 1 jar inside the building, taking the other 2, 1 in each fist, to Judith's place. Stepping over the fallen fence, Rory moved into her house. The entire back wall had been destroyed, followed by the drywall and wooden structure leading up the stairs. By the sounds of destruction, the frog demon had nearly made it to the 2nd floor. Hey you ugly fusterlugs. Come on, Frogface. I've gigged your kind right in the mouth. Stop messing with Judith and come get me. The frog demon continued its destruction of the stairwell. Out of the corner of his eye, Rory spotted Walt, who was hiding behind the couch. Walt. I need your help to save Judith. Bury it, said Walt. Yeah, I know, kid. He checked over his shoulder. Rory could see the brine man watching from the backyard. He'd never seen him outside the factory, but stressful events allowed apparitions to do more than they were normally capable of. Can you run up and get the frog demon's attention? It'd help Judith. Bury it. Before Rory had to prod Walt further, the boy went up the stairs. The 2 small glass jars felt rather impotent in his grip as he waited for Walt to bring the frog demon to him. When a great roar filled the stairwell, followed by drywall breaking off and falling to the ground as the creature turned and headed back down, Rory had a sudden wish to be anywhere but where he was standing. With the plastic boot on his left foot, he wasn't going to be able to run fast. Walt came down the stairs first, laughing with that fervor in his eyes. The frog demon came down right behind him. Walt stayed on the bottom step, and the infernal creature opened its mouth to devour him, which gave Rory the opening he needed. As the frog demon's fists went through the ghostly form of Walter, Rory threw a fastball into the creature's wide mouth. The jar went right into the throat, momentarily choking the demon before it swallowed. Recognizing Walter as an apparition, the frog demon swiped its fist through his form again, before turning his attention to Rory. Seeing how the first jar had done nothing, Rory ran out of the building with the frog demon on his tail. He hobbled over the fallen fence, feeling the creature right behind him. Rory managed to throw himself through the back door before it reached him. He lay on the ground as it tried to fit itself through. This time it was more forceful and the frame started to crack. If he didn't figure something out soon, he was going to be the demon's next meal. As the frog demon roared, Rory had an idea. He unscrewed the lid, which came away surprisingly easy. Being careful not to get any of the white powder on him, Rory held up the jar and waited for the frog demon to open its mouth again. Come on, you ugly fucker. Open wide. The creature was halfway through the door. The frame had buckled. Rory grabbed a mug from the kitchen table and threw it at the nose of the demon. When it barked back, he tossed the open jar into its mouth. White powder spread across its purple tongue and jagged teeth. When nothing happened, a sense of doom filled Rory. Then he remembered the brine man's mention of boom jars. Maybe it needed an ignition source. As Rory worked through the finger gestures for flame, the frog demon finally squeezed itself through. Rory tripped over his boot as he backed up. The creature towered over him, arms reaching. As a strong fist grabbed his leg, the frog demon opened its mouth. On his back and within seconds of being eaten, Rory had one chance. He made the gestures, filling his mind with phase, and shot flame into the frog demon's open mouth. Then the world exploded and everything went dark. Rory woke with sirens sounding in the distance. He thought they were coming for him, until he realized he was lying on the floor in the front room of his hall, with only a few small candles as illumination. A bandage was wrapped around his head. He looked down to see blood splattered across his body. The last thing he remembered was igniting the boom dust in the frog demon's mouth. He tried to sit up, only to find his head hurt. A lot. Two figures were watching him. He startled when he realized that both Walter and the Blind Man were standing in the front room, the faint light casting strange shadows through their bodies. "They've been there since you killed the demon," said Judith, entering the room with a steaming cup in her hand. "I brought you some tea." "What's going on? Is it over?" "No," she said, "but I haven't seen any more demons on our street. Reports are coming in that there's a battle near the Glitter Dome." Rory recognized that it was dark outside. He'd been out for hours. Judith helped him sit up so he could drink the tea. Then he remembered the mercury in the factory basement. "I have to get up. I have to move the barrel out of the basement." Judith put her hand against his shoulder. "It's fine. You were talking in your sleep about it. Kept mumbling about the mercury bringing the demons. I didn't know what you were talking about until Walter led me into the factory. I had Fred across the street help get rid of it. He drove it into the 12th ward and returned a short bit ago." She glanced to the apparitions in the room. They both seemed to relax once it was gone. "Oh, good." Rory took a sip of tea, which was a little hot. He had to suck air through his mouth to cool it. "That's good, thank you." It was strange to sit on the floor and drink tea while the two ghosts stared at him. He cupped the mug, enjoying the warmth radiating through the ceramic. "Who is Walter to you?" he asked. Judith stared at the boy. "I'm his grandniece. His brother's granddaughter. Do you know what happened? His death has always been a mystery." Rory took a drink while he thought about what he'd learned. "I think I understand. Brine Man, that's what we call him. He was making explosives and some elixirs for one of the local gangs. That's what all the stuff in the basement was. Walt must have seen something he wasn't supposed to and Brine Man tried to cover for him, but they found out. Stuffed him in a barrel of salt water to drown and I guess killed Walter somehow. Fed him a lethal dose of mercury would be my guess." Judith's eyes went wide as she plopped onto the couch. "He couldn't stop shaking before he died. That's what my grandfather said. Tremors, headaches. They found him in the yard. He could barely breathe. Died shortly after. Never knew why. Until now." She looked up. "Thank you. Why do you live there with the ghost of your granduncle?" For the others it was too real for them. Too much pain. They hated the way he played tricks, moved things in the house, hid their keys. But I always sensed his pain. He wasn't always visible, but being near your hall has made him nearly real, and now I can finally tell the family what happened. It will bring them relief. The Veilstone makes it easier to see them, talk to them." Rory looked to the two ghosts. "What now?" Walter approached his great-niece. He leaned over and kissed her on the forehead. A tear slipped from Judith's eyes and she wiped it away with the back of her thumb. The boy held out his hand to the Brine Man. The two of them walked through the wall, heading away from the house. Rory was certain that was the last time they'd see either ghost. Judith stared at the wall in silence. She sighed and asked, "What should we do now? I don't like staying in here with no door." "We'll climb into the factory basement. I can throw a board over top. We can hide there until this is over, or it doesn't matter anymore." Judith nodded grimly. It'd be up to someone else to fix the larger problem, but at least he'd dealt with the demon on their door. Patron Sebastian would be pleased to hear about what had happened with the Brine Man. It was enough to help them piece together the rest of the history of the Enochian district. "I'll grab some meats and cheeses and a bottle of wine," said Judith, heading back to her place with the shotgun tucked under her arm. A charcuterie at the end of the world. There are worse ways to go. Rory climbed to his feet. He was shaky but managed. The sounds of sirens and gunfire was far away. He hoped it would stay that way. As he looked out the busted door, he saw two figures standing in the middle of the street. They both waved. Rory waved back and then they were gone. This has been Shades of the Past by Thomas K. Carpenter.